Welcome to the Color Code. My name is Cullen Kelly, and I've never met a motion imaging creative who I wasn't excited to chat with. But it's not every day that I get to sit down with a motion imaging creative as illustrious as my guest today. Corinne Bogdanowicz has an awesome body of work, including contributions to shows such as Reservation Dogs, Shrinking, and Our Flag Means Death. We had such a cool conversation about her work on these shows, how she thinks about grading, how she thinks about client collaboration, about developing looks, about building LUTs, about doing HDR grades, and what it's like to come from a family of colorists and color scientists. Very excited to share this chat with you. So without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with Corinne Bogdanowicz.
Okay, I'm very excited today. My guest is Corinne Bogdanowicz. We're getting to hang out. We're getting to chat. It's actually our first time meeting in person. Welcome, Corinne. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Yeah. So where to begin? I mean, you have an amazing career, amazing body of work that I'm so excited to talk about, and just like where your craft is at and how it's evolved over the years. And you also come from a pretty amazing family of motion imaging people. Your dad, Mitch Bogdanowicz, who's one of the most famous color scientists in the world. He's also a mentor to me. Your sister, Jill, who we've had on the show here before. So you come from this very illustrious family, and you are a huge part of this legacy, like multi-generational legacy of like awesome motion imaging artists.
For starters, I feel very fortunate to have the family that I have. Obviously, having the resources of people to talk to about color science and color in general is super awesome. There's not very many people in the world that understand what we do and the science of it and the art of it and all of that. So very, very fortunate to have them in my family. My brother's also works at Keynote Flow and lighting, so he's involved. And my mom's in real estate, which is super helpful in LA. So not in the industry, but still great.
Yeah.
But I guess, starting out, to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to do color. I was out of college. I went to art school. I wasn't really sure what the industry was all about. I knew kind of vaguely what my dad did. I knew, he worked at Kodak on film stock development for years and years. But I didn't really understand exactly what that was and what that meant. And Jill started out here, of course, very early on in the industry before I did. And again, I wasn't even really sure if that was what I wanted to do. So I started at Pack Title doing dust busting at the very, very bottom. For all the young people, that is actually painting out dirt on digital film scans. So it's very painstaking and it takes
literally
a lot of time.
Frame by frame.
Literally
right?
frame by frame, painting out individual dirt and trying to find it and staring at a screen for hours and hours. So that was my first job, and I started working with the software development team. It was at Pack Title, and we worked on making like an automated dust busting system. So I was kind of involved with the testing of that, and I really liked that part of the job, like kind of figuring things out. Then I kind of went into some painting and compositing, and to be honest, I thought I was going to go more the visual effects route. I was kind of a little bit more interested in that at the point, and I was kind of like, I don't think I'm going to do color because, my sister does that, and like,
Yeah, sure.
don't want to like do all the same things. But things happen. They actually asked me if I wanted to be an assistant colorist at some point there, and I was like, well, I'll try it out. And I started assisting some of the other colorists, doing a little bit more of the technical stuff. I was very close to their conform team, so I learned a lot of that side of things. And then ultimately, one of our colorists left, and they needed someone to fill in and do a feature. The very first thing I colored was a feature. And I just kind of jumped into it and did it. And I was like, okay, wow, I love this. The speed of it and the collaboration and, the art of it. I loved it so much more than visual effects, and not to, just visual effects or anything. That's a art of its own. But I ended up really gravitating towards color, and I just kind of stuck with it since then. So funny thing is that I had done color before I ever even sat with Jill. So
Wow.
I had, on my own, I had kind of like worked my way up, separately while she was also working her way up at different companies. So, she obviously had been working at it first and had, quite a large base of clients at that point. But, I kind of had to work my way up as well.
Yeah. Well, it just sounds like I love that story that you were not, you were almost like, oh, I want to find another direction, and you had some ideas in mind, and then you just got bit by that damn color bug that we've all been bit by.
Yeah.
And so it was, what was that project? What was that first feature that you did?
I think it was called Whisper. It was like a little horror movie. And I know the client was just super willing to like work with me. They knew it was my first project, and they were super awesome and very patient.
Yeah.
Probably. I feel like I did a good job, but who knows? It was my first project.
Yeah.
It's a cool looking movie.
I have to go. I have to see it. Because I'm so interested thinking about like, okay, so you're coming into Whisper. You've been a color assistant at that point. You've also done dust busting. You've also at least dabbled in compositing and VFX. You also, I'm sure, have had at various points your dad like pouring color science into your brain, at least passively. So like, what was that? What do you feel like you learned? How did your craft grow from that first project of actually grading something?
I mean, I think I figured out that, the actual color part of it is only part of the equation. It's really the collaboration of working with people and trying to kind of get into their brains and figure out what they want and interpreting that into the color. Because I had done a lot of, as assisting at stuff, playing around with the color and obviously rotoscoping. And at that point, renders and all sorts of QC stuff at that point. But really the collaboration part, I think, was where I really had to do a lot more learning. I'm naturally kind of a quieter person. I'm not super outgoing. I'm not super like, chatty. So that part of it really was a struggle for me to like really put myself out there and be confident that the choices I was making would look good to them as well.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Sure. Yeah.
It takes a lot of time.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's such a cool thing to talk about too, because I'm sure both of us have met colorists who are kind of like all along the spectrum of like very, very like outgoing and energetic and essentially extroverts, like people who actually get energy from interacting with people. And I know like me, for example, I love talking with people, especially like these kind of conversations, but I'm ultimately an introvert. Like I get my energy from sort of retreating and having time with myself. Yeah. And I mean, maybe first question, like, do you feel like you gravitate toward one of those more than the other?
Oh, 1000% introvert.
Yeah. I mean, based on what you said, I would have guessed that. Yeah. So like my question for you, for all the introverts who still want to do client facing, collaborative color grading, how do you wear that? What have you learned? What do you apply to make that work?
I mean, I think for me, pushing outside of my comfort zone is always a good thing. And I think you kind of have to do that naturally with color anyways. Sometimes you have to kind of like try new things that you maybe didn't think of, or come up with new looks and that type of thing. So it's all kind of related. Yeah. It is hard. I do enjoy when I'm like unsupervised just for a little bit, get like a little breath, crank through my work. I can get everything done. But I do really enjoy, especially as the years have gone on and I've gotten more confident. I do enjoy working with the people, and I found that most of the clients are really cool and really collaborative and really artistic themselves. So it's always kind of a fun thing to figure out kind of what's in their brains.
Yeah, sure. And I imagine it's for you, like for any colorist, like it's about finding the collaborators who want what you specifically have to offer, because you have something different than anyone else. And so if they like, ideally, I guess you find the right collaborators who really like your energy in the room and what you bring. And I don't imagine at this point in your career, you're not trying to be anything other than Corinne, right? You're just doing your thing.
Yeah.
And your clients love that, obviously.
I hope so. Yeah, no, I mean, I can only be who I am and do what I can do. But yeah, I mean, in general, I've really enjoyed the collaborations and the people I've met so far. I've had very, very few, bad experiences or things that have gone wrong. It's usually things go very well and people are very appreciative. So yeah, I love that part of it.
And end of the day, like, introvert, extrovert, like, super outgoing, a little more reserved, wherever any of us plot on there, you love collaborating, right? That sounds like a big draw for you initially with color. Like, oh wait, I think I might have to do this after all. Right?
Yeah. Had you asked me 10 years ago, or I guess I've been doing this longer than 10 years. When I was younger, I suppose.
Many moons ago.
I would have never said I would do it because I'd be like, no, I don't want to like sit and talk to people all day. That's terrible. But no.
Yeah. That's like it. No, I mean, especially when you're, like you said, when you find your people and when you find collaborators who you can really help and creatives who you can support, bring their vision to life, like that's just cool.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Wow. So, I mean, I guess like I'd love to just kind of keep going through sort of your career journey a little bit. So
Sure.
we got pack title and dust busting, and maybe I'm compositing. Oh, I'm a color assistant. Oh, I guess I'm grading a feature. And
I'm a colorist.
yeah, totally. So tell me, how did the journey go from there? Where were you? What were you at a facility when you did that feature?
It was actually still a pack title.
Okay. Gotcha.
That was all pack title. And then I was there for a few years. The company was sold. Made some changes. I ended up leaving at that point and going to PostLogic.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for a couple of years. They also got sold. Became Prime Focus, and then they ended up kind of steering away from DI and going. I think they ended up doing more like 3D conversion type work. So I left there. Worked freelance for a little while. One of my biggest supporters was Mark Hara at Disney. I did a lot of Disney trailers.
Mm-hmm.
Worked with him quite a lot. Did a lot of freelance work. Then I worked freelance at DreamWorks for probably about 6 months. And I like to call that my 3D boot camp time. Mm-hmm. We were working, I was helping on their Shrek 3D conversion projects. And so that was kind of a different thing because it wasn't really sitting with clients. It was sitting with their internal team. But I would sit and go over their 3D, almost like the 3D dailies. Like they would look at the in-progress 3D conversion work every day. And so I'd sit with their stereographers and I'd be playing the shots back. And I did a lot of, they had like elements that they had to pre-grade for the conversions. And so I was working on that. But I learned a lot about 3D. It was kind of fun.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. And then after that, I mean, it was really about 12 years ago, I did a freelance job for the folks at Light Iron. They were in their previous facility in Culver City and did one freelance job and ended up coming on with them full time the next year.
So you've been, have you had any Resolve stints? Like when you were freelancing, were you on Resolve or at any point?
Not very much. I did use Resolve for a few. We have Resolves at Light Iron as well. I did use Resolve for a few projects. Mm-hmm. There was a time when we were switching from Pablo or Rio at the time it was called. We were looking into switching to either all Resolve or all Baselight, or we weren't really sure what we were going to do. So I did do some projects on Resolve to try it out, and there was just some logistical things that made it easier for me to do it on Resolve. So I have used it, but yeah, in general, for the most part, I've been using Baselight for years now.
You've used it all enough to know. It sounds like Baselight, like, would you say that's your tool of choice if you could have any system?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
For sure.
It's a pretty cool system.
Yeah, I do prefer it. I mean, there's just a lot of things that I really like about it. And, when we were looking to switch, the biggest thing for us really was the internal color management that Baselight has. Like it was so robust. There were so many cool tools that they had in there, and HDR was just coming about. And so like we knew we needed to be able to switch color spaces easily and do all the conversions. And I was just like, that's what we have to do.
For sure.
So,
well, I know from conversations I've had with your dad that like you have worked with him in the past, like to try to get color management solutions in place for like non-vanilla problems that would arise of like, your P3 conversions or your film out matches and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And was that like, even that stuff, that those were solutions that were being probably implemented within Baselight on top of the good solutions that were already there. Is that right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, my dad, he used to make our film conversion LUTs, and sometimes specific things for conversions and stuff. But yeah, you can use Baselight with all traditional LUTs. You can do all sorts of stuff in there, but they also have their own internal, color space management, which is really super robust. And then you can build the looks into it. So yeah, that's primarily what we've been doing for the last several years.
Would you say that like that their, like sort of like film oriented color management framework, is that the biggest draw for you of Baselight over like say a Resolve or some other system? Or are there other value props that you're like, oh, this is why I have to have the Baselight?
I mean, the color management is probably the biggest thing. I mean, obviously both systems do a lot of the same things, just in different ways. That's for sure the biggest one. I mean, I like all the Baselight tools, even though it's kind of a weird layout. It took like probably a couple good months, especially for our Conform team. We do our Conform on Baselight as well.
Oh,
it works a lot differently than all the other editing systems. So it took quite a while for everyone to kind of like really get into it, but now everyone loves it.
Yeah.
Like it's so flexible. One of the great things and worst things about Baselight is there's many ways to do a thing. And I remember even asking the Baselight team when we first started it, we'd be like, okay, how do you do this? They're like, okay, well, you can either do this, or you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. And we're like, well, what's the right way? They're like, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Need answers.
So it's a little bit frustrating, but it also makes it super cool. So you can work the way you want to work.
Yeah, and you can tailor a workflow that's ideal for you.
Exactly. All of the colorists that we work with that work on Baselight at Lighturn all work a little bit differently, but it's all kind of within the same general, overview system. We will all work, very similarly in the big scheme, but then like we all structure it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I'm trying to organize my brain. I have so many like avenues of exploration I want to go down with you. Okay, here's one that I want to talk about. So you're a freelancer. Let's talk about that point in your career. You're a freelancer, and one of your big clients is Disney. You're doing Disney trailers. So tell me about that. Like, are you freelancing at a shop or a facility, or are you running out of your house? Like, what did that look like? I don't even know what time period are we in at this point.
2009, 2010.
Okay.
So I was not working on my house.
Yeah, you need a box
somewhere. At that time, it wasn't really, it was mostly still projected, still film outs at that point.
Right.
So I was usually brought into a facility.
Okay, so that solves all the like security, stuff that comes to mind when you say Disney.
Yeah, exactly. It was hard. It's hard to work freelance, especially getting into a facility. They had their own colorists. Like most people didn't want to bring someone in from the outside, but it was actually a really good learning experience for me, I think, because after working at just a few facilities, I wasn't very confident that I like knew the systems and could like jump in and out of other places. But I ended up really learning a lot because every facility has their own structure of the way things go and, their own workflows. And so I kind of had to just like be flexible and learn all of that. And I think ultimately it just made me stronger.
Sure.
Just being able to kind of like, figure it out and then ultimately be confident that like, okay, actually I did figure it out. It wasn't so bad. So
yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I feel like I've like learned from and spent time with like a lot of like sort of like the generation prior colorists who have maybe had an entire career at facilities. And they've been in the chair for a really long time, and they've been supported by facility infrastructure and personnel for a really long time. Yeah. And there's like sort of a natural thing that happens there where you're like, I can do my part really well, but like prep, delivery, like dealing with like curveballs is just not a big part of their day to day. So they don't have that muscle set built up.
Yeah.
What I feel like I see like with my favorite artists who are still like, operating at a facility, like senior colorists, really accomplished artists, is like, they're like you actually can deal with, it sounds like, whatever comes up, like because you've had to do like the freelance side and get the conform and the delivery, like, oh, the VFX is not coming in properly or it's not managing right. Like, I imagine none of that stuff at this point, it flusters you.
No, not really. I mean, funny enough, even starting at Lighturn, 12 years ago, there was only like 13 employees. So I was loading in, I was hooking up drives, I was building IKEA furniture. We were the vault. We would put things away. We would, set up the rooms. We would do our own calibrations. We would do everything kind of on our own. I mean, of course, we had really, really smart people. Those 13 people were very, very smart. So it was, it was easy to kind of collaborate. But also it was just an environment of everyone trying to figure out the best way to do things and not, putting people down for questioning the way things work. I think it was a really great place to grow. So, not all the places I'd worked were like that.
Yep, for sure.
Don't want to put places down, but, sometimes when people are like stuck in their ways for years and years and have done it, they don't really like some young person coming in being like, why are you doing it that way? Wouldn't it be easier to do something else? And, people don't love that. But, luckily the Lighturn crew was, all young, really cool people, really trying to like push the envelope, do new stuff. And so it was really kind of fun. It was just a fun place to be, fun place to learn. Everything was being built. Is that I did a lot of things. Everyone kind of did everything because that was just how it was back then. As we've grown, of course, that goes away a little bit. You get more people, so everyone's jobs get kind of divided back into where they're supposed to be. But I still do a lot of stuff there. Sometimes I'll jump into the conform side. Very close with our whole team on the deliverable side and the conform, and all of us colorists there kind of work together a bit, which is not in the sense of like we're working on the same projects together, but like we share ideas, we talk about cool new stuff that we're learning or some fun thing that we've done. So it's a really fun, like collaborative place. Then, we're constantly like changing and like pushing the envelope, which is fun.
That's really cool. I feel like you've just touched on like two of the most interesting aspects of like, like working at facilities versus working as a freelancer. Like I think on one hand, I talk to so many colorists who maybe haven't had the opportunity to work at a facility, and they've got a particular picture in their head of what that's going to be, that, like they're going to be, like the red carpet will be unrolled for them and they'll come and sit at their thing and only make pretty pictures and be with clients all day, and someone else will take care of everything else. I've never met a colorist who's like really, really succeeding at a high level who doesn't at least have the ability and doesn't enjoy like pivoting around and jumping into other roles when necessary.
Yeah.
But you just touched on what I think is the actual benefit of working at a facility. I know it's what I miss about like having been in a facility, is that interaction with other really smart people who are solving problems. Like, oh, what are you working on? Like, check out this thing that I figured out on this job yesterday. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And you work with, you've got a great team at Lightiron. And I feel like you guys, you can tell me because you've been there now for 10 years, but I feel like somehow as your facility has grown, you've really maintained that culture of like growth and exploration and, like breaking old paradigms and models, even as the company's, it's not 13 employees anymore.
Yeah. No, we still try, our best to kind of, be on the bleeding edge of, changes in the industry. And, again, it's just, we have that great team, of people that really, try to, push the boundary of kind of what we're doing, and also kind of teaching the other people that come in the company. We get new people all the time, younger people, better people. People are going to take our job someday. Like, we really want to make sure that people understand what we're doing and are part of it and learn. And, I think it's really just kind of spreading that information and kind of rising everyone up.
Yeah.
It's kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So I'm fast forwarding now and looking at like sort of present day, recent history, Corinne, and like your craft and your work now. You're doing, I mean, you jump around a lot. I see you do a lot of film, but like a lot of episodic, a lot of like serialized type of things. And I'm sure, are you doing commercial as well? I don't even know.
We don't really do many commercials.
Mm-hmm.
We've done a couple, but in general, we're mostly doing either features or episodic.
Long form stuff. So I wish you could like, there's a way to like tally like in a given week, what is like Corinne's output of like final graded shots? It's in the thousands, I would imagine, like quite easily.
We're busy probably.
Yeah. I mean, because you're like, I see your credits, like you got a lot going on, and it's obviously a completely different muscle group than commercials where you're like, yeah, we might spend 3 days on 15 shots. You're doing like a normal day of grading for you is probably what, like at least a couple hundred? Am I getting that right?
Oh, yeah, at least. I mean, things are moving fast these days. Luckily, I like to work fast. I actually kind of thrive on getting through stuff quickly because just the way my brain works, I think if I'm like switching back and forth to shots, I can, figure out the differences, much faster if I'm working quickly.
Sure.
And I just like to like get through it, like get like a good base on whatever I'm working on, and then I can like go back through and fuss with things. But yeah, I mean, especially for episodic, the time we have to do stuff is kind of getting shorter and shorter. So, I could do, for sure a 30-minute episode in a day. In an hour long, we might only have like 2 days. Features, I'd say on average, well, a short feature would probably be about a week. Sometimes 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on the budget and the scope of the project. But yeah, I mean, stuff moves fast.
Yeah.
Stuff moves fast. So I'd say, a good 20, 30 minutes of content a day.
Do you remember, like, if you rewind to, like, I don't know, like prime focus or, like some other era of your career, what would those numbers have been then? Like 30 minutes of content at that point, like several days at least, right?
Yeah, definitely slower. Definitely slower. I mean, the systems were just slower. You couldn't navigate the media as well. There was usually some render times or caching or something like that. So for sure, we can move faster now. Also, things like tracking and shapes and all that stuff. Now you literally just press a button and it just
does it.
It's done. There's very little fussing to do. Back in the day, we used to have to do a lot of stuff by hand, or that was a lot of stuff I did as an assistant. I would actually do tracking as an assistant. The colorist would set up one frame and then I'd have to go back through and track it or roto it or stuff like that. Now this stuff, we don't even think about it. It just happens for us. So for sure, everything's much, much faster now. I don't know how slow it was back then, but very slow.
A lot slower.
I remember checking renders at 3 frames a second. That is painful.
That hurts.
That's not fun.
It's so weird how quickly we get spoiled and forget that was the reality for a really long time.
I like to think it wasn't that long ago. I mean, realistically, it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh, it was just a few jobs ago.
Well, it's that weird thing though. Like I don't know how you feel about it, but when I look at that, I'm like, I mean, that's so awesome that we have like all these like machine and software resources that allow us to work faster, but it's not like we're getting a break. Now we're just expected to turn around the 30-minute episode in a day or whatever it is, which like leads me to something I've been wanting to ask you for forever. Like when I look at your work, it's like, I mean, you're talking about, like dailies colorists put like, they're asked for even faster turnaround than that, but dailies colorists have a much broader, it's like, it's the one light, like make it look decent. You're putting out polished work at the clip we're talking about. Yeah. So like, give us the playbook. What are the principles for like working really fast and getting great results?
I mean, if there's one right answer for this, but I mean, generally what I like to do is before I even put a pass on it, I'll set looks with the clients, or at least have a good discussion about it. Ideally, they'll be sitting with me because I think things just go a little faster that way. Yeah. We do remote work, but it's always just a little bit harder because I can't get into their brain quite as quickly. Yeah. If they're sitting with me, I can get the reactions much faster. So I like to just kind of go through kind of scene by scene, set 1 or 2 shots, talk about it, get kind of like a good idea of where I'm going to go. And then from there, I kind of just quickly rough everything into those looks. I kind of just run through, again, scene by scene, just kind of like rough it in, get it really close, and then kind of move on. And then I'll kind of go through and just play back through things, see how things are flowing one scene to another. Usually things start changing a little bit at that point. It's kind of like, okay, this is working, this is not. You start to do some of the final shading, shapes, windows, tracking, all that stuff kind of happens as I start to go back through. And it usually, I find at that point, once you kind of get through that pass, again, it's fast. It can be a day or two. Then the clients can start to feel comfortable, like looking at things as a whole and kind of seeing, for them, what's working, what's not. And then they can kind of, start to give me a bit more feedback. I don't mind people sitting with me while I'm doing that quick pass, but usually I just have to like get it on there, get it evened out, do some of the like hard work. So if they're giving me feedback at that point, like that's cool, I'll start integrating it. But ultimately, it's easier if it's like already in a place. We're trained as colorists to be able to see the changes that I'm making. Mm-hmm. The clients aren't always
it's pretty
know
boring.
What's happening. So they see me make a big change and they're like, oh, whoa, that's too much, even though maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually fine. Or if like something's really green, especially green and magenta, if something's really green and then I neutralize it, they'll be like, oh, it's magenta.
Yeah.
It's not.
No, it just was green.
It just was green before. So stuff like that. Sometimes you have to like take a step back and like, okay, step out of the room. Now let's watch back through it and then see what you think. Because sometimes as I'm making the changes, it's not so constructive.
You just like something about the way you described it just now almost makes me feel like it's like, okay, if you're a really good pilot, like you can probably fly a fighter jet, but that's not going to be a very fun ride for someone who's not used to like riding in a fighter jet. Sure. And you're going to fly that plane differently than if you're like driving a like a 747. Yeah. It's like your pass at the speed you have to go, you're in the fighter jet. You're doing like going upside down and doing, like the all the crazy acrobatics to get it done. Yeah. And that totally makes sense. Like that can be vertiginous for like a client. Like, wow, that's a lot of things coming at me. And then there's those lulls where it's like on the monitor, the output is like nothing has changed for like 20 seconds. Like what's happening? Like, well, I'm teeing this up or I'm like comparing this to that or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a pass that whether someone's in the room with you or not, you need a little bit of time to focus on just doing the lifting of getting it level.
Yeah, okay. For sure. And, I do the kind of balancing at the same time I'm putting the look in. I know some people like to just go through and like balance it first and then like introduce like the look, but I kind of like to do it all as one. I just think it's easier.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And that's like the context and the background that you come from too, of like, in a more like photochemical or film system, like the look is kind of always there a little bit from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I think having the look in there changes the way you balance things sometimes. Yeah. So I like to have it all there. And then, you can always make changes afterwards. Nothing's set in stone. So.
Yeah. Let's talk about like the look development side for a second. So how does that look for you when you're doing that initial, okay, clients in the room, we're setting looks. What are you using? Are you like making like global layers of things that are going to affect all the shots? Like what's kind of like the process for that?
So I guess it depends a little bit on the project. If I've already been involved with creating LUT or involved with the dailies in some way, I do like to incorporate that as like a starting point for what they're seeing. If again, like say I've made them a LUT that already has a little bit of a look baked in, I'll start with that. And then again, we kind of go scene to scene and I'm using the color management. I kind of pick my starting point depending on what I know about the project. Again, I like to start a little bit close to where the dailies were at least, so they're familiar with what it looks like. If I start with something crazy different, they'll be like, what is this?
What am I looking at? Yeah, that's not my show.
So at least I like to start with something they're familiar with, and then we can build from there. I start to talk to them about images that they had as references or other movies or TV shows or what kind of things they were thinking of when they were shooting. Usually people come in with some sort of idea of what they want. And so then I just kind of go from there. We start building a look, playing around. As I said, usually we'll just stop 1 or 2 shots and eventually things change. Like we'll start maybe doing a couple scenes and then we'll get to the one that's like, oh, I like that. Do that in the other scenes. Okay. So it's always changing. It's always a little bit of an evolution of finding that look of what everyone's happy with. I'd say that's kind of the like look setting for the overall piece. If I'm creating a LUT for on set, that's a little bit trickier just because I'm usually trying to find something that's going to work for a broad range of material. Obviously, you don't want to do something super, super crazy that's going to fall apart in certain material. So with that, I'll kind of like step into like, okay, what are the qualities that we want to introduce into this? Is it filmic? Is it a contrast change? Is it, certain colors? Do we want to pollute the blacks? Like what kind of things do we want to build into there? So that I kind of break apart a little bit more into pieces. So I'll kind of say like, okay, maybe we want like a creamier highlight. So I'll like introduce that into the LUT and, that type of thing. I probably are a little bit more conservative in those looks just because, again, I don't want something crazy to show up on set and they're like, whoa, what are we doing?
What do we got here?
So for that, again, it's, we want to get the look they want, but it's probably going to be a little bit tamer than where I'm going to push it for the final.
Yeah. It's got to fit everything.
Yep.
At that point. Are you typically doing just one LUT to rule them all? Is there like a LUT plus some CDLs for certain scenarios? Like do you offer any kind of like menu of variation there?
Yeah. Again, depending on the project.
Sure.
It's, I think, a little bit easier to have one LUT just, organization wise. But I will make multiple LUTs if there's some pretty drastic different looks depending on the show. Sometimes I'll make CDLs to go along with it as well. That's kind of an easy way to be able to change just the LUT. So yeah, again, depends on the project, depends on what they're asking for, what it needs.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm curious, I don't actually know how it works at Light Iron. Do you guys have like a in-house color science team who support you with these things, or is it mostly just artist by artist? You've got a very technical lot of artists on your team there.
Yeah. We don't have like a full-time color scientist. Obviously, my dad has consulted for us. Jay-Z has consulted for us at times. We've had people kind of come in and help out with certain projects if we need them. But in general, the LUT building and the overall color management, we just do on our own.
Wow.
And again, it's that kind of like, I've always had to kind of do my own thing, so I'm very comfortable with it. Not everyone that comes in is as comfortable with it. So we kind of, try to share what we know. And if anyone needs help with a specific thing, then we'll bring someone in and help out with that. But
I mean, yeah, that's a whole, like, it's related, but that's a whole other muscle group, what you're talking about, from like color grading, taking passes, sitting with clients. Like I always make the analogy that it's kind of like I can play the guitar, but it doesn't necessarily mean I can build a guitar, which is kind of what you're doing with the look dev process.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your POV, because you've got experience there and you've been doing it for a long time and you're in your Baselight and you're really happy there. Do you feel like the toolkit that you're availing yourself of in Baselight to build, like your LUT for on-set viewing, is that like pretty optimal for you? Like it has everything that you need and nothing, it's like a really good tool for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So far, Baselight's color management, the way it works is we can kind of pick which DRT we want to use. So, we can use ACES, we can use film lights, internal color, we can use airy looks, we can use red looks. There's all sorts of things to pick from. So I usually kind of just pick whatever is appropriate for that project as a starting point. And then, the cool thing about making a look for on set is I'll make a correction into whatever DRT I've started with as a starting point. And then I can make a LUT for there for Rec 709. Now when the project comes back, a lot of the times we're doing HDR.
Yeah.
And usually, sometimes on set they're doing HDR. Usually they're still just looking at Rec 709. So ultimately, I'll just take that correction that I've made and now map it into HDR.
Yep.
So I don't actually have to use the LUTs at all, which is optimal because LUTs in themselves are always limiting a bit. So just using the color management, I get way more flexibility. So it's really
it's really cool.
Yeah.
So you're really on like the bleeding edge there. Like you're building like a scene look essentially that just receives a display target for SDR or an HDR, like you're saying.
Yep.
Okay. I feel like I want to like geek out for a second on color science, or not even color science, just like the DRTs that you mentioned. Like, I think that's such a fascinating part of the process of like that initial selection of like ACES, ARRI, like TCAM, like, do you have, it sounds like you'll do all those depending on the project. And do you select it like, do you have any rules of thumb for like, oh, I'll always use ACES in this scenario or like TCAM in that one? Is it just pure vibe, like just feeling it out?
It's usually vibe. It's usually, depending on obviously camera, dependent. Some things work better with others. I find ACES works really well with like Sony products for whatever reason.
Interesting.
I feel like they've kind of worked that out really well. For Red, I usually use their own thing. Like, it just depends on the project. And TCAM's really cool because it's really kind of almost like a neutral starting place. Like it's a lot of information in there, but I can really build my own look into it. It doesn't have so much of a strong look itself.
Yeah.
So that one's really fun if I really want to do some like really cool things. Obviously each one has its own little qualities and quirks. So I usually just kind of pick whatever I think is going to be right for the project.
Yeah.
I regret it sometimes. Hindsight's always 20/20. Sometimes I'll look back and be like, oh,
those damn bleached highlights with the ACES or whatever. Like.
Yeah. So sometimes it changes, but usually whatever I pick is good. Yeah. I can work with it. So much of the look is what I'm building anyways. So it's like whatever starting place I pick is just kind of just the base.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like I feel like you'll relate to this probably, that there's like, it's almost overwhelming when you're like, oh wait, when I'm color managing and when I'm building a look in scene space, like there's so many options that can shape that final rendering. Like what color management do you do? What kind of manipulations underneath it do you do? But I think like you're applying that sensible counterweight that you're like, yeah, you don't want to pick a like DRT system that's totally at odds with what you're trying to do. Yeah. But ultimately it's just your base and you can push things underneath in a lot of different directions, no matter what you're grading under, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
That makes me breathe a little sigh of relief. It's sometimes a little overwhelming.
There's not always a wrong answer. Usually you can make it work.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get a surprise. Sometimes you're like, oh, this isn't what I expected, but yeah, this works. You do something cool.
This is interesting. Very cool. Yeah, and so would you say it sounds like on a lot of your projects you are getting the opportunity to get involved early and like tee things up for success on set, and then you're just continuing that work when you get into the grade for it, right?
Yeah. If we can. Honestly, that's like the ideal scenario. If I can, make a LUT for on set, have the general look kind of already built, and then they come in, I can have that as my starting point. We'll bring in the CDLs, everything matches, that's fine. We can start with that. And then we get into the final finishing. That's usually the ideal situation. And then again, like depending if it's HDR, if it's projected or Rec. 709, whatever we're finishing, or more commonly all three of those things.
Yeah.
Whatever one we're doing first, it's already kind of mapped. It's already kind of done and ready for me. It's much easier to start with that. If it's been done, dailies are done at a different facility and they have a look or a different LUT that they've used, then I kind of have to figure out what to do. And I'm like, do I use their LUT? Do I build a similar look into my color management system? Just again, if it's going all these different color spaces, I need to be flexible. Sometimes using the LUT that's already built can be limiting. So sometimes I've got to kind of pivot.
Yeah.
And again, talking to the clients, figuring out what they want. Do they love that LUT? Do they love that look? Is that like the thing? Do we need to do that? Or is it going to be something different that's going to make my job a lot easier if I do something else? So that's where I usually kind of have to figure out where I'm going to start.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a key part of that same process of kind of planning where you're going so you don't paint yourself into a corner.
Yeah.
So wait, we didn't do the HDR and I don't have a match transform for that.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'm curious actually about HDR specifically. Like, question number one, SDR first or HDR first?
Ideally HDR if I can.
Okay. And then you just trim down to SDR.
Yeah.
And you're doing, it sounds like, two separate physical deliverables. You're not doing like a Dolby Vision thing necessarily.
A lot of times we are doing Dolby.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what the deliverable is. I'd say most of the projects that we're doing right now are Dolby Vision. We usually set it up so we're actually doing them both HDR, SDR kind of simultaneously.
Sure.
I'll do like a base analysis once I kind of have a quick pass on the project. Have the SDR. I usually have like a starting trim that I use that I'll put on there. Because again, depending on the client's involvement, if they're going to be in the room with me, usually they're looking at the HDR first with me.
Sure.
But sometimes we have people remote. And sometimes we're streaming 709. We'll do HDR if we can, but sometimes if they can only view the 709, I've got to have that ready to go too.
Yeah, for sure.
So a lot of times we're kind of doing them at the same time. Just obviously reanalyzing and trimming as we go.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'd say generally we do that. Sometimes HDR 10 deliverables or something where we're doing separate. It just depends on what they're asking for.
The HDR 10 seems to be kind of losing ground a little bit more.
Yeah. We're not getting as many requests, I don't feel, for that. And then again, like projected, sometimes we'll still start depending on where it's ultimately going. Sometimes we'll still do HDR first. Sometimes we'll do projected first and then trim for HDR afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it just depends on what they want to do.
Yeah.
I'd say it's a little easier technically to do HDR first. Just because you have so much more information, it's kind of the harder grade. I think if you get that done, all the other conversions kind of happen easier.
Yep, for sure.
Starting with P3, I think is kind of funny because a lot of people just like to see things big on the projector, and that's fine. But then when you go to HDR, you usually have to do a little bit more trimming because you're just seeing more than you saw before. So, again, we just kind of do whatever the clients want, whatever is the main deliverable is usually what we'll do first. But yeah, I say I prefer HDR first.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And it also completely overwhelms me when you're describing your workflow. Because I'm like, okay, so you're doing the HDR first. You've got kind of a parallel SDR rendering that you might actually be like, are you sometimes physically looking at, like, you've got both of those monitors?
Both monitors up all
the
same
time. Okay, so another geeky question for you. You've got a base trim for the Dolby Vision to get that SDR rendering. What for you, do you have like a rule of thumb for like what triggers like, all right, I need to reanalyze this shot for the SDR? How do you know when to do that?
Usually after I've done a pass where I've made a lot of changes.
Okay, so you're not like hitting it
I'm not doing
manically
it constantly.
every trim on every shot.
No, I mean the trim. Once you get like a base trim on there, it's not changing drastically, even
Right.
as you're changing the colors. So usually I'll only reanalyze like after I've made some big changes, or especially if someone's going to be watching remotely right before they're going to watch remotely, and I'll just kind of scrub through and make sure things are lining up and make little adjustments if I need to. But yeah, I'm not constantly reanalyzing. That would be crazy.
I feel like I've done that job before and felt crazy by the end of it. Like,
Yeah.
I can't keep doing this. This can't be right.
No.
And then are you doing like, I don't know why I'm like grilling you about Dolby Vision now, but I like want so badly to like steal all the knowledge. When you're like doing your Dolby, so you've got the analysis that you're being sensibly sparing with, and it sounds like you're also working like the Dolby trims as you go along as necessary. So then you reanalyze, and then you're like, all right, if anything still needs to change, that's where you're going to take a second look at the Dolby trim for that shot for the SDR.
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, I mean, mostly while I'm coloring, usually I'm really looking at the HDR.
Sure.
And the SDR is kind of off to the side, but usually, like, again, depending on at what point I really feel like people are going to be looking at the SDR, I'll look through it and make sure things are lining up. It's usually like, especially like bright scenes, usually need a little bit more adjustment with the trims. So usually I'll just kind of run through those, make some kind of global adjustments. I will do a better like final pass of it before we deliver it, where I'm actually just looking at the SDR. But it's kind of nice to have it generally there when clients are in, because sometimes people want to see what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
You know, as we're making these choices, they'll look at that and then they'll look back at the HDR, and everyone kind of wants to see the differences. My general setup is I usually have like an X300 and X310 right in front of me. But usually those are 30 something inches, so they're not that big. And then I have a PVM off to the side, which is for Rec 709. And then usually on the other side, I have a much bigger consumer HDR monitor. We try to calibrate that all as close as we can. Just so clients can see things bigger, just because sometimes the size is a little bit hard for people. They don't want to be sitting like right
right
on
next
me.
to you.
They want to be able to see things as well. So we have a bigger reference monitor as well. So yeah, generally multi-monitor setup.
That's cool.
It can be a little bit overwhelming, but usually clients get into it after a little bit.
Well, I mean, I actually really like the way you put it. Makes a lot of sense to me. That you're like, well, ultimately, by nature of the HDR having more dynamic range, that's going to be where more fussing kind of needs to happen to get it all feeling good.
Yeah.
So if you're focusing there, then sort of by definition, the SDR is going to be no more difficult to dial in, and probably easier in some cases to like get the highlight roll feeling good and all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, so I think if you put the work into the HDR as you're doing that first pass, if you're balancing things out, the SDR goes really easy.
Yeah.
And even the P3 pass, because you don't have that same range. So once it's all evened out in HDR, like it's kind of easy. It's much easier in SDR because you just have so much less that you're going to see anyways. So it's like it's already pretty even. So you can make a global adjustment or whatever. But in general, you don't need to go in and like adjust all the highlights like you would if you started an SDR and then you go to HDR. Sometimes in SDR, you didn't see highlight differences, or you're just seeing more information or more color in the highlights. And then you have to go in and adjust them.
Yeah. Do you do like, do you like impose like a hard speed limit on HDR masters of like, oh, this is going to be a 300 nit peak, or is it, you just go with the monitor and like trim per shot?
I mean, I don't have like a hard rule or setting that I use. Again, depends on the project. I mean, I'd say I rarely peak things at 1,000 nits.
It hurts.
Right. I don't,
it's a lot of...
most people don't react well to things being that bright. So I do generally start with a roll off, but I could still go up to 600 nits.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a much softer show, we'll maybe do 300 nits, maybe even less. But again, it might change scene to scene. Maybe there might be some brighter scenes. There might be some scenes that are softer. So, again, it just kind of depends on what we're doing. But yeah, I'd say overall, I start with like a little bit of roll off.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Most people don't like that harshness. I also sometimes, again, depending on the project, will build in a little desaturation as it gets brighter.
Yep.
Just because it holds so much more color, and it's just not a natural feeling even though, your eye can see this stuff in real life, sometimes it's just too much. You want to just tone it back a little bit. So
it is weird. Like we've got that, century of conditioning from like movie prints and stuff that like highlights bleach, highlights desat as you climb. And it's like you say, it's like you look at it like, it's not like I wouldn't ever see a colorful highlight, but there's something about it that feels odd in an image so much of the time. Although I guess like, I love like the caveat of like whatever the project needs, whatever the client wants, that, you keep emphasizing, because like maybe you've got a client that's like, yeah, I dig that. That's what I want, like a really colorful highlight. And I'm sure you're better positioned than most to accommodate. You're like, cool, let's do that and figure out a pipe that does that.
No, for sure. I mean, there's definitely opportunities to let things go really colorful and really bright. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's awesome. But yeah, not all the time. Not all the time. Depends on what we're doing and how distracting it is. And one thing I always like to say is like, just because you can see it with your eyes in real life doesn't mean it's comfortable to watch. Like if you think about like we work in dark rooms all the time, like, and then I walk outside and it's bright, like it hurts. I want to put my sunglasses on. You don't really want that feeling to happen when you're watching TV. You don't want to be like in a dark scene and then go to an outdoor scene and all of a sudden it's too bright. Like it doesn't feel good. You have to adjust these things. So.
I've like, I got an analogy I came up with at some point with a friend that like, if you and I are having a conversation and like you're standing in front of a window and it's the middle of the day, without even thinking about it, I'm just going to walk to your left or to your right because I don't want to talk to you while I'm being blasted with daylight 10 stops over you.
Yeah.
So there is something about like shaping reality into something more palatable.
Yeah.
That's a big part of what we're supposed to do, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean.
That's literally our job.
Our job. Make it comfortable, make it look good.
Okay, so here's what I want to ask you about next. I went back and forth and like, I want to ask you about this project or that project, but there's so many that I really couldn't decide. So I kind of want to put it to you, like, do you have any like favorite projects that stand out to you over the last couple of years that were just exceptionally fun to grade?
Sure. I mean, there's been a lot, but so you talk about one that I just finished like last week. Super, super good. Reservation Dogs.
Yeah. So you've done that. Have you done the whole series?
I did not do the pilot.
Okay.
They did that kind of earlier on. And then when they did the rest of the series, they had a new DP and a whole new finishing crew. So I did everything after the pilot for the last 3 seasons. The show was so good. And the look is really cool. We really kind of pushed this like, it's almost like broken a little bit. It's like, really strong coolness in the shadows. We've rolled down the highlights. We kind of let a lot of like green and things kind of come in. So it's kind of like this fun, like imperfect color on very natural material. And it looks really, really great. It's really good. It's one of my favorites. One of my favorite looks, and just there's awesome color separation. It's really fun. The content is great. The show is amazing. So that's just one that I'm just really proud of from these last couple of years because it's been just a really fun collaboration too. The DP is amazing. Mark Schwartzbard. He's really great, and we've just really had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. How much highlight roll are we talking here? Like, or is it like I don't know how the hell we quantify that, but it sounds like you're pushing that hard.
Yeah, this one we rolled down quite a bit. I'd say we probably peak more like 300-400 nits. But he also shot, it's pretty filtered. So there's already a lot of natural like bloominess to the highlights in a lot of the stuff. So I didn't have to like crank it down. It wasn't a really sharp image to start with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, a lot of softness in the highlights. There is kind of like a filmic vibe to it a bit. We did add grain. We kind of dirtied things up a bit. It's kind of one of those like really fun, like perfect, imperfect plays where it's like we didn't like fuss too much about everything being perfect. We kind of let things bleed a little bit. Like the blacks would be a little polluted and like bleed into some of the other colors, and like it's fine.
Yeah.
It's cool. It looks really great. And I think we got some really, really great images throughout the 3 seasons.
I don't know why this question comes to mind, but like something about talking about rough or imperfect. I've talked with colorists in the past who are like, no, like part of the vibe of the show was like not to overmatch, like shot A to shot B to shot C.
Sure. And
I always find that really interesting and really challenging. Think about like, no, just let it go. I know it feels a pink, like a little bit of a pink like drift over there, but like that's okay. And I've had clients be like, no, just do that.
Yeah.
Like, you ever done projects like that? Or like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, depends on the project. Like, sometimes you don't want to fuss over certain things. I mean, I always like to have like the overall feeling of the frames be very similar. Like, it would drive me nuts if it was like magenta and then green and then magenta and then green.
Yeah.
That would drive me crazy. But I think, as long as the overall vibe is feeling right, like, you don't have to nitpick about every little thing. Like, was the exterior of that window match the exterior of that window? Like, maybe not. But like, does anyone care about that? That's not where they're looking. Sometimes the little details of things like don't have to be perfect. Of course, it depends, because I've had clients like that's all they focus on. They'll find like the one little thing that doesn't match, and they'll be like, "Oh, this whole shot doesn't match." And I'm like, "Well, okay, but that one little thing doesn't match."
Well, I mean, you guys have had with Ian, you guys have had Fincher in the house with his laser pointer.
Sure.
Like there's that school too. That's like, I'm fussing about like, oh, but I want the chance to dial in the pinks or the magentas, but like, I also don't want that job of like. Like get everything like so perfectly dialed in.
Yeah, some clients want it to be exactly perfect, and sometimes it can be a little messier. And again, I think it depends more on like the content of what you're working on, if that works or not. Sometimes I actually find some of the hardest shows to color are the ones that are like super, super natural and like soft, because you just can't hide anything. Like, everything has to match perfectly. If you want it to all feel very real and very natural, like sometimes it's just really hard to do. Whereas if you have like a strong look on something, that kind of hides some of the imperfections, so you don't have to be as perfect.
Yes. Yeah. And like specifically contrast, I guess, like when you've got like some stronger contrast, it's going to sort of glue things together in a different way.
Contrast exactly will help kind of hide some of the imperfections, and also either desaturating or oversaturating. Like, sometimes that kind of hides stuff.
Yeah,
in a good way sometimes. But yeah, in general, I find anyways, just making something like really feel real and perfect, depending on the footage that you're starting with, of course, like sometimes it can just be really challenging.
It's always those like more open, airy things that like there's not a lot of like crunch built in there. Like you have to like, it's hard to make all that flow and feel good. Well, I mean, that kind of like naturally leads me to like, can you think of any projects in recent memory, or even like far back as we want to go, that were exceptionally challenging in the type of ways we're talking about, where like the collaboration might have been great, the end product might have worked out great, but you just had to sweat a lot to get it where it needed to go?
Challenging. One recent one it's not even out yet, but what's it called? Irish Wish. It's a new Lindsay Lohan movie that I think will come out next year, and it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous movie, but they shot in Ireland. And so the lights change. It's
like just constant lighting change.
Constant light changes. Clouds, sun, that type of thing. It turned out absolutely beautiful. And again, another great collaboration. But that was one that it was just like, just a lot of work. Like when there's like no two shots, when you can just like copy the color, you have to like
everything is
you have to
hand.
Like do each one by hand. It just makes a lot of work. So that was one of them. Yeah, I mean, there's been a bunch over the years that are just more challenging. But again, it's usually those things where it's just like, light changes, a lot of exteriors, car chases, like anything like that, where it's just like things are wildly changing and we're shot all different times of day, but you need to make it look all the same. It can take a lot more time.
Well, I feel like in those situations, I'm like watching you grade in my mind's eye right now. And I feel like what we were talking about earlier, like the fact that you like really try to work sort of at speed, I feel like that has to be helpful in those situations where you're like, are you playing things at speed a lot and just looking at how does the cut feel in context to make those assessments?
Yeah, I mean, usually I'll kind of like pop through shot to shot, get things kind of like roughed in, and then I'll go back through and play it and see kind of what's happening. Just because, especially when things are fast moving, you have to just be able to kind of follow it, and then I'll see what pops out and stop and make a change, and then back up, play over it again. Keep just kind of rinse, repeat.
Yeah.
Keep going over it until it feels cohesive.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like the tell me the name of the title again. Irish
Irish wish.
Irish wish.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a tongue twister.
It is.
That sounds like a really great example of like, yeah, exteriors in a, like, I feel like anywhere in Europe, the light.
Yeah. Yeah. Anywhere where clouds come in. And again, it's like, it's so gorgeous because they shot it there and like, it's so beautiful, but it just, it was just a challenge to like go through and get everything really evened out, but it worked. It worked really great.
I mean, those are some of the most rewarding ones sometimes, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super cool. Gosh, I'm trying to think what else I wanted to ask you about today. Like that's so many of like the things I know I wanted to discuss, like, like look development and like how you work with clients. I guess, another one that really comes to mind as I like reflect on what you're sharing about your career is like, if we look at the sort of landscape of the industry now, like we're in the middle of a really interesting time with, the Writers Guild on strike and the Screen Actors Guild on strike. And a lot of us in post are like feeling a slowage, and it's probably going to continue to slow down for months coming. But even in that context, like I'm a brand new colorist. Like what are you going to advise me to do in terms of building my craft and building a business? Like any wisdom to share with me?
Oh boy. I mean, I think the advantage of slow times is that you can kind of reinvent things. You can learn a lot. I mean, I think there's been and will continue to be a lot of changes in the industry. I think especially the digital cameras are still, even though they've been around for a while, still fairly new. There's still a lot of changes coming in there. So I think there's just a lot to learn, a lot to like get into, really understanding the color science, really understanding, looks, and really the hardest part, as I said, is really trying to work on like communicating with people and figuring out what they're trying to tell you. Because I've had clients all the time come in and tell me, well, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know the technical terms. I'm like, you don't need to know the technical terms. Yeah. Like, that's my job. It's my job to know the technical stuff. It's your job to tell me how you feel about it. Like, do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you have images that you do like? Do you have, as I'm changing it, is there a spot that it feels good? Like, trying to really understand that part of it, because that I think is the hardest thing to do in the room. I mean, obviously knowing what tools to use to get there is very important, and being able to make changes. But, ultimately, I always feel like while we're working, like it's all changeable. Like if you don't like it, fine, let's do something else.
Yeah, sure.
Let's try it. So that, I mean, I think that there's a real advantage to being able to like have slow times to really kind of like work on all that stuff. Obviously, as our facility, as things are slower, like we are working on like making some improvements and faster things and replacing stuff that needs to be replaced. Like there's a good time to do all that while things are like, slower. It's always an advantage to have time to do that stuff. As far as advice about the industry in general, that I don't even know. Who knows what's going to happen? Are we going to work again some days?
Yeah.
No one
Hopefully
has any idea. I hope so. I mean, it feels like once things get going again, there's going to be a boom of new stuff coming along, and hopefully some really good ideas and things are going to come out of this, but I don't know.
So for everyone listening, get good at your thing now while you've got the time, because it's going to be needed. And
we're going to be busy.
Yeah, if you're not good at it, no one's going to be good at it.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I guess like another question that along these lines that just popped into my head is like, I mean, you guys have you have a team of assistants, obviously, who support everything at Light Iron. Is that right? Or is it like, do you handle a lot of like kind of end-to-end jobs in some cases?
We do have some assists now. For years and years, we did not.
Really?
But yeah, we have our Conform team is super, super strong, and they actually do the job of, I feel like, probably multiple people at other facilities.
Sure.
But yeah, we do have some assists now. But in general, a lot of our colorists still do a lot of
like they're touching every shot, type of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, how does that, like on a normal show for you? Do you have the type of assist who's like, hey, I've got the look set, like go in and ripple that, or is that more your thing?
Not usually.
Interesting.
Usually, only if I'm like super, super, super busy.
Yeah.
Generally, I go in and do it myself.
Yeah.
If I can. It's just, I've done it for so long that way. It's like, it's easier for me. It's hard. It's always hard to like delegate something to someone else and be like, okay, do it. So that's just how I like to work. But again, depending on the workload, sometimes we do have people
Sure.
come in and help. And we have some really, really awesome people that help out. So
Sounds like it. Well, so this one might be a harder question for you to answer since you're not necessarily delegating to a second colorist all the time. But is there anything that you see, like just pure craft wise, like forget about business and all that stuff, like craft, hands-on, like working with images? Do you see like common mistakes or oversights that newer colorists make of like, oh, you're not paying enough attention to like the deep shadows? Like I'm making that up, but like, do you see anything like that comes to mind?
That's a hard one because again, everyone works
Everyone
a
has
little
their
bit.
own
Everyone works differently.
thing.
I mean, I'd say the biggest mistake I find is like, especially people starting out, they'll try to like match things really perfectly. Like they'll do like, split screen and like get everything just right. And they'll spend like 10 minutes on one shot. And I'm like,
You got to go.
move on.
Yeah.
You don't have time for this. This is not, if you can look at the two images one after another and they look good, move on. You can come back and do some fussing later. But like if you're spending too long, your eyes get adjusted to it. And so what are you even looking at after a while? So I think that's like the biggest thing, just trying too much to make it perfect right off the bat is kind of a big one for me. I'm always just like, just trust your gut, make a look, do it. You think it looks good? Match the next shot. Match it quick. Go to the next one. It has to kind of be like that so you can see the overall picture of things. Otherwise, you're going to get bogged down.
I feel like I could take that advice right now. That's so hard to do.
Hard.
Like have the discipline to just like do the best you can and trust that that's like all that needs to happen right now.
Yep.
Move on and then catch it on the next.
It takes a long time. It takes a long time to like trust your gut feeling and also, kind of it again ties into like kind of trying to get into what the clients want because you have to trust your gut, but also keep in mind that little like, okay, what things did they like? What are they looking for? Did this person hate magenta? Maybe I should.
Yeah.
Maybe I should not like magenta. Like you have to kind of like keep all of those things in mind as you go. But again, I commit to something, like make a choice, put it on there. If it's bad, you can change it.
Yeah.
Probably though, some of your choices are going to be good.
Be good. Yeah.
You have to kind of trust that your eye is going to make something look good. You know,
for sure.
That's what you're hired to do. So, you have to kind of trust it a little bit. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. Well, that's that weird paradox too. That like I feel like oftentimes the 30-second then move on grade is actually better than if you give me 10 minutes to stand there and fuss.
Yeah.
For all the reasons that you just said, like your eye adapts, like you start losing like sense of priority and like the scale of this shot within an overall sequence. Like it's often better, even though it's usually more fun to spend more time, but doesn't get as good of a result, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, it's just like overall picture. I think it's easier for your brain to like get something on there, and then you can go back and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And then you can fuss. You can go back in and you can, do all the little details and you can do windows and you can, start making things fancy. But, I think it's important to just kind of get something on there so you have something to look at and really see, is it working? Is the scene into the next scene work? I mean, that's a big part of it, having one part of it flow into the next, if it's supposed to be a big change or if it's not, or it needs to be subtle, or if, there's a tonal shift, like you need to be able to track all those things. And, if you spend too much time on the nitpicky stuff and then you go back and it doesn't work, you got to change it all anyways. So yeah.
I love that you've emphasized that a couple times today. And I really love the emphasis on like, okay, the scene as a unit is important, but also what is the cut from scene A to scene B? Is it meant to be emphatic? Is it meant to be silky smooth? Like, what is that feeling? That's another one I'm definitely taking away. I'm going to go apply that to my work today. That's a great thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Well, wow. I mean, I feel like we've lightning rounded through a bunch of different stuff, but I'm just so glad we got to like finally meet in person and have this cool conversation. I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and wisdom today and for chatting with me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you inviting me here.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Thank you so much for coming down.
Yeah.
See you soon.